It's about everybody's like favorite guy on this Dallas Cowboys team and organization, Dan Quinn. Like I don't think that there's
Brian Anger.
Would you say that Brian Anger's more beloved than Dan Quinn?
Yeah, for sure.
Really?
Yeah, you saw how many people were like worked up when it looked like he was going to walk away, and then when he got re-signed, they were like, yes. So I'd say Brian Anger.
Okay,
personally.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Bobby's doing the trolling. All right. No, Dan Quinn does feel like he's the most beloved person in that building, bar none at this point.
Yeah, I think if you were to do one of those Gallup daily tracking polls, approval ratings.
Fantastic. A lot of people know what that is.
I think that they should. I think that you'd find that within the building and outside the building and on the fan text and out at the stadium and everywhere else, the approval rating for Dan Quinn is sky high. I don't know that there is such a thing as a Dan Quinn critic here in Dallas.
And some of that is because the results have been unimpeachable, particularly this season. I mean, you've held every team that you've played under 20 points, and you'll be looking to do that again this week against Philly. The question then becomes, how does he do it, right? Like, how is he capable of doing that with this defense, and how does this defense shut offenses down? And I guess where you have to start is like the talent that he's been given or the talent that he sought out. Because yes, you could talk about Micah Parsons. Yes, you could talk about Trayvon Diggs. You could talk about DeMarcus Lawrence. I mean, how many guys would you probably count to that Dan Quinn either had a say on or definitively asked them to go get?
That's a good question. I mean, everybody in the last two draft classes he had a hand in. And then I think that he had a hand in guys who aren't here anymore, Keanu Neal and DeMonte KZ. But I mean, in terms of J-Ron Curse was probably more of a George Edwards guy, but I think in general, Anthony Barr, that's a guy that he probably was big on. That's a George Edwards connection right there too. But just about everybody in the draft class, he has a big say in the draft class, but it's different than the way Rod Marinelli had a say in it. That the way Rod Marinelli had a say in it was Rod Marinelli had guys that he liked, and Rod Marinelli wanted to go get them. Whereas it's more of a blend with Dan Quinn going like, guys, here's my parameters. These are the type of guys that I look for. I want to let you know this is what I need. All right. And you just go find me the players that you believe in that fit that. And so he gives them parameters, and then he goes out there and he puts in the work with them, but he trusts their evaluations. That's one of the reasons I think he has a really strong relationship with the scouting staff too.
And so you have this crop of talent, and like you mentioned, I think it was a great explanation there, Bobby. It's one of the reason why Bobby's really great. And you should listen to the Love of the Star podcast with Bobby and Brian.
Yeah, Broadus.
Just
give me the assist there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
I was actually struggling in that moment, so really a problem. But no, they do a fantastic job breaking down things like this. So yes, he has the talent to then work from, but talent alone doesn't get you everywhere you need to go. Ask the Green Bay Packers defense this year. They've got tons of talent. The scheme doesn't work out, and they're constantly leaving guys running wide open, booty butt naked open down the field. Right? That is not the case with these Cowboys. So what schematically is Dan Quinn bringing to the table on top of the talent that he has that makes it so that this Dallas Cowboys defense is shutting the water off for offenses?
Well, I mean, a big part of it this year has been, look, Dan Quinn's his MO has not been to be just like a blitz happy guy. That's never been his way of doing things. And of course, everybody knows that his background is in the defensive line. That's where he really kind of made his name. He was a defensive line coach for a long time, and then obviously became defensive coordinator with the Seahawks. But that's where he made his name. That's why you see so much trust in him from guys like, Dante Fowler, who believed in him enough to go to Florida, wanted to go to Atlanta with him, wanted to come here to Dallas with him. And so that understanding of guys on the defensive line and how to scheme them up and how to have success with them is something that I think you see playing out here with this football team right now in terms of how strong that defensive line is, because there's a difference between having the talent and knowing how to use it. Like, I mean, Jordan Lewis, Anthony Brown, these guys have been here for a long time. They had career years under Dan Quinn. Guys we've seen a lot of examples of guys playing their best ball under Dan Quinn here in Dallas. And it's because I think he knows how to schematically deploy guys. And over at Football Outsiders, Derek Klassen, who's a really good writer. Derek had done a breakdown more specifically of what they did against the Rams, but talked about how they're able to have success with the front four. And just going to read a little bit from that. He says, nothing makes playing defense easier than being able to get to the quarterback with four rushers. Almost everything else a defense can do to create an advantage requires some give and take, but rushing four is the standard. And this is because you can scheme up pass rush. You can't scheme up coverage as easily.
No, I mean, there's only you have to have the people to execute.
That's
it,
why.
right?
That's why people generally feel like you have to have. It's more important to have talent on the back end than necessarily at defensive line. You'd like to have it there, but it's something that you can at least scheme up rush a little bit because you can create a numbers game and do some different things. So it's a real advantage when you can have 4 talented rushers and
get pressure.
Not just have 4 talented rushers, know how to deploy them and know how to generate pressure off of that. And it's like Derek says here, he says, if a team can only rush 4 and still generate pressure consistently, that alone is the basis for a top 10 unit. It's such a clear, simple advantage that has also been the only answer anyone has ever had for beating Tom Brady for the past 2 decades. That is how the Giants have won 2 Super Bowls against him, is they had a front 4 that was dominating the trenches in those Super Bowls.
And I mean, like, the reason why, just to break it down, football oftentimes is a simple numbers game, right? Yeah. And if you're in an instance where you're rushing 4, that leaves, out of 11, let's do the math there, that leaves you 7 folks in the back that can actually, now defend in coverage. And so the best quarterbacks in the league, the fewer guys you have in coverage, the better that they can, pick you apart and surgically find. Because, I mean, obviously the accuracy will be good. The arm strength will be good. The more people that you can put back there.
You plug up passing lanes.
You plug up passing lanes. You make them have to hold the ball more. And then you also, it ends up being kind of playing off each other where the back helps the front at that point, and those 4 have a little bit more time to get to the quarterback. And so I think that those things matter, but it's not just the fact that they're getting there, it's how they're getting there.
Look what happened last year when Dak Prescott was the running game wasn't playing the running game wasn't going very well. The offensive line was leaking. They were giving up pressure. When teams realized they could generate pressure with 4 and they could stop your running game with just 4, they started dropping 7 back, and that's when things really went south for Dak Prescott.
Right,
in the
the quarterback's now playing
year.
on All Madden.
It's like playing on All Madden with the old quarterback vision cone that existed for like one Madden iteration.
That was that 08?
Gosh, yes, and it was the worst thing they could have ever added. I hated that.
Unless you were playing with Peyton Manning, who had
the whole field, but nobody else did. Everybody else had like a 2-yard wide cone. It was the worst. Anyway, we're getting inside baseball for all the Madden fans. Derek writes here, the Dallas Cowboys have one of the few elite defensive fronts, which can wreak havoc on opposing quarterbacks without bringing extra bodies. In fact, the Cowboys lead the NFL with 68 pressures on 4-man rushes per Sports Info Solutions. Besides the 49ers with 67, an obvious inclusion at the top of the list because we know the stud front they have there. We saw that in the playoffs last year. No other team has more than 55 pressures with 4-man rushes. The Cowboys' 36.1% pressure rate with 4-man rushes trails only, of course, the 49ers. And he goes into a breakdown of, individual plays of here's the Cowboys having success with it against the Rams on Sunday and how they're able to pressure things. And it's a good article. I'll tweet it out and you guys can go find it on @BobbyBeltTX. But he talks about in total, the Cowboys generated 28 pressures and 5 sacks on the day. All but 3 pressures and 1 sack came on 4-man rushes. Those 25 4-man rush pressures were the most by any defense in a single game this season. Better yet, the Cowboys' previous 2 matches against the Giants and Commanders also ranked top 12 by that same measure. So they are able to, as Derek Klassen puts it, they've got this perfect blend of top-end talent, depth, and this crafty coaching that knows how to deploy these resources.
Depth does matter because they're rolling guys in.
Oh, yeah. The rotation they have on the defensive line. I remember Rod Marinelli was not notorious. He was known for that his rotations were heavy. There was very rarely a guy who played 70% of the snaps on the D-line. And they're rotating a lot. And that matters in the trenches because guys get heavy legs. You want them to be fresh. The thinking is, fourth quarter, we want fresh legs to go in there against these guys on the offensive line
that usually play a whole
worn
game
down. Yeah. And so that's some of the thinking there. And one of the things about this is deploying that 4-man rush. Some of the crafty coaching they talk about are these twists, these stunts, these games, things like that. So think about it like this. If you've got, the defensive line lined up. Typically, I think most people who are familiar with it, if you've played Madden, for instance, or you've just watched football over the years, you're used to just the standard, all right, you got the defensive ends here and the defensive tackles, and they're all just rushing ahead. That's not what the Cowboys do a lot of the times. They deploy twists more than anybody else in the NFL, which are
pretzeling up in front of the
you start. It's exactly what it sounds like. It is a twist. The defenders start rushing, and then they kind of twist. The defensive end a lot of times, or it'll either be the defensive tackle going behind the defensive end who starts rushing to the inside, or it can be the tackle starting to rush a little bit to the outside shoulder, and then the defensive end coming up the middle. The first time we really saw that with Dan Quinn was week 4 last year. when they played the Panthers. And they started deploying these twists. And I think it's because Dan Quinn started realizing after 3 games, like, what do I have here? Okay, I know what Micah Parsons could do. I see what Randy Gregory can do. Man, this guy Oso Digizua, he looks like a really good player.
Yep.
And they realized, I got the personnel to do this. Because there is a risk here. If you run these twists and you're wrong on the read, for instance, this week, I think it would be hard to run some of these twists with the RPOs that Philly runs.
That's where I wanted to get to.
Because if it becomes a running play, you're losing gap integrity. It's sort of a slower developing type of play because you got to kind of run around. And in the process of that transition, the gap is unstable. You've left yourself vulnerable. And so if it is one of those things where they can read that and they read the coverage and they can hand it off to Miles Sanders, boom, he can get right up the gut and find an open lane pretty easily.
And
so
how does that match also with the understanding that this Philadelphia Eagles offensive line is a good one and an athletic one?
It is good, and it's very athletic. Brian Baldinger, who's just on with G-Bag Nation, if you guys want to go back and check that out, that was a really good interview. You can go back to 620 on the Odyssey app and listen to that. But Brian Baldinger talked about, Jason Kelce and the type of athleticism he has and the way he's
a lot on the outside.
The way Kelce can get to the second level, especially with some of those twists inside, and he can be a lead blocker on that for those things that are slower developing. And you hit the hole with Miles Sanders or Jalen Hurts just breaks contain and is able to get up the middle. They can have a lot of success against Dallas that way. But it is good to see that that Dan Quinn, I think, knows his personnel, knows how to use them. And how long have we complained about that? Right? Like, how long have we complained about, like, man, it seems like we got the players here, or like we got all this talent here. Why isn't it coming together?
Right.
Where's the coaching falling apart? You remember the discussion back 2018 when Bassick had asked Jerry about, like, basically, why can't we have the Rams coaching staff? Like, why can't they do what the Rams do?
Right.
And Jerry got a little upset, but it honestly was a good question from Mike. Mike asked a reasonable question. Why can't we have coaches that do this? And I think now you do have somebody who does that. It's just not on the offensive end like everybody's used to.
Right.
You've got it on the defensive side of the ball, and it is a guy who knows how to put his guys in position to succeed, knows, all right, Jaron Kearse, I know what you do best, I know what you don't do well, and we're going to scheme it up to where you are in a position to succeed.
And, I think it bears noting because we are talking about the defense as a whole, and we've kind of isolated in on the defensive line, which obviously is the tip of the spear for this. But the safeties that play both in that third level and that second level. So I'm talking about Jaron Kearse, and when he was out, Donovan Wilson. Yeah. Those guys matter a lot because those guys are helping play the run as well when you're kind of in these lighter packages with more defensive backs. And make it so that teams can't just get heavy on you and run on you.
Yeah, and I think
and then also help play tight ends, which are one of the most mismatch laden positions in the league.
Kearse was incredible against tight ends last year. That was a big advantage for them. They've been looking for years for somebody to lock down tight ends, and Kearse became that guy, and really stepped up for them and became a reliable run defender. If you want to talk about somebody to spy Jalen Hurts this week, because I know a lot of the time people have suggested Parsons, like, wow, Parsons is such a great athlete, and he can, keep tabs on Hurts and track him down and use his instincts to, Dallas's advantage here. I'm not with that. I want Micah Parsons rushing the passer. If you need a spy, and I don't know that they're going to spy to him, but if they do it, I think they're going to do it with more like Kearse or Wilson. Bring one of those guys up in the box. Those are, especially Kearse. Kearse is a very reliable tackler. He's probably the best tackler on the team. And so I think that when you're talking about you're wanting to wrap up a slippery quarterback who can, really stress your defense with what he can do with his mobility, I think you want your most reliable tackler there. So for me, let Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker hold on to some of the traditional safety roles. Bring up Kearse, let him spy, let him play things more closer to the line of scrimmage and protect you on that front.
So I'm glad you brought that up because we'll talk about that and more at 8 o'clock when we talk about the matchups to watch in this game, Sunday Night Football versus the Philadelphia Eagles. But it's the Get Right on 105.3 The Fan. Reginald's out of Tula. Bobby Belt in for Kevin Gray.
Can I ask you a question?
Go for it.
Does the fan text know I can read the fan text too?
I don't think so.
It doesn't seem like it. 314, you can call me the DAC writer. That's fine.
Well, sometimes, to be fair to those folks, they know you can see it, but they're addressing it directly to me. And sometimes they want you to see it.
That makes sense.
They also want you to feel that.
They don't want to acknowledge my existence.
Right. It's like when you're standing with a group of folks.
I see what you're doing there, 314.
You intentionally don't talk to this one person, but you're talking to this other person about that person, you know what I mean, in their earshot. I think that's what they were going for there. The disrespect was intended.
I guess so. 314, I mean, that's St. Louis. Is this KG upset that I'm sitting in here?
It's a different part.
Or he's Kansas City. Yeah, he's Kansas City. Whatever. It's all the same. St. Louis and Kansas City. I'm the person who has no like real concept of. I was stunned to find out how far away San Francisco and LA were to each other because I was like, that's California. They're all like, I think of everything like the Metroplex, I guess.
We might need to dig into your knowledge or lack thereof of geography at some point.
There's a lot of things we need to dig in on my lack of knowledge.